Welcome everyone to another Knocked Conscious. This one's my brain already hurts and I haven't even introduced anybody yet. So let's start with Sterling over here. Sterling is a new gentleman that's new to the Knocked Conscious community. Then we got Rob over here, who's also new. But then we've got a long time, long time, or whatever, long time, not first time.
I've been on like 100 times already, it feels like.
All right. So Brent and I had this awesome podcast with Tyler Tott on Tuesday. So we decided to do a third Thursday therapy session where we're just going to chew the fat for like an hour at noon. So I have to play this intro because I just threw it together. I just got to see if it's going to, I'd love to hear you guys' inputs. I got Brent's input, but we got to see if it's going to pass copyright. But I'm just going to hit this because it'll be fun.
I know a nooner when I hear one.
Sky rockets in flight. Afternoon delight.
Whoop. The rapist.
That's therapist.
Afternoon delight.
Hey. Afternoon delight.
That was funny.
That'll be your intro. So hopefully we'll get that through and hopefully we'll have you guys on. We're going to do like a panel show and just kind of have like a men's health and just general talk and stuff. So welcome, gentlemen, to a Knocked Conscious, because we're literally going to talk about consciousness. So who would like to go? Sterling, welcome. Let's start with Sterling. We'll go to Rob and then we'll go to Brent just as a hello and a little bit about yourselves. And we'll start there.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me okay?
Sound great, man.
Okay, cool. Super stoked. I've been on Brent's podcast, I think twice before. Went really well. Covered a lot of territory. I love talking about consciousness on Twitter. I get into fights about it all the time. Is AI conscious or not? Microtubules or Gawar. Those are kind of like the areas that I talk about a lot. So grateful to be here.
Thank you. And Rob, go ahead, man. A little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I just like attention and I blackmailed Mark, so I got on the show.
Yeah, it was the craziest thing because like my head's spinning. We've been trying to do a consciousness one with Brent and Rob, and I invited Rob, but didn't know I invited Rob. And then he's like, "Hey, we're doing this thing tomorrow." I go, "Okay, sure." So Rob,
that story is actually partially true. You did tag me for the record. I was like, "Am I losing my mind?" But
100. No, you absolutely. It's on me. I totally take it, and I'm happy that we could have you, man, because we need extra minds here. So welcome. And then Brent, of course, man, a little bit about yourself.
I was going to say he introduced me to you, and then sorry.
No worries. Yeah, Brent Freeman. Man, I do a lot of things. By day, I work at one of those evil big tech companies. Sterling is one of the few people in the world that knows which one because we did an in-person podcast there. But also really focused on the podcast, Aiming Up podcast. So I'm interested in all the things, the sciencey things, the political things, philosophical things. Super interested in consciousness. Also run a clothing company, a narco syndicate clothing company. So narcosyndicate.com. Got some pretty cool designs there. Go pick something up if you want to, or don't. I don't give a shit.
Cool. Thanks, man. Well, gentlemen, welcome. So I think I want to start just so we're all on the same page of at least what angle we're coming from. So we know some general terms, because I think the same terms can be used opposite and it gets really confusing. So property of consciousness. Do you all think that consciousness is an emergent property of self-organization over evolution in time? Or is it a foundational property, almost like a field that is there, that is now the cause of everything? Because now we're getting those two sides. So Sterling, I'd love to get your first thoughts on just whether it's like emergent or foundational, and we'll start from there, and then we can build on each of the principles.
Yeah. So second one, well, first, but okay. So it's not emergent, and I don't like the word emergent. It's just thrown around so much. Even Mark Levin agrees. Like, he used to use the word emergent, but enough people were like, well, what do you mean emergent? Like, to who? It's, it's not really a good word to use. It's a very hand wavy thing. So saying like, well, consciousness emerges if you have 1 billion transistors in a computer, according to how, who, and what. Then they say, well, if you have 1 billion neurons in your brain, then consciousness just emerged from the complexity. This doesn't explain anything. This is a terrible way to look at these definitions. Oh, it just emerged. If it was just one less than 1 billion, there's no consciousness at all. But if you add that one neuron, the scientists said it was emergent, so therefore a computer could do it too. So that's where you get when you start thinking like that. So I think the better way to probably think about it is there may have been a spark of consciousness that is involved in physical matter going back to the very beginning. And I mean, I'm not up to date on like what was the minute zero of all time and space. That's still an open question. Nobody here could, I think, answer that conclusively. Penrose seems to think that it's a cyclical cosmology kind of thing, which is his own
orange theory, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's
I've
a lot.
I've got one that I still haven't even shared that's just out there. So
I want to hear about these things. But the idea is that consciousness would be a property that is kind of like mixed with gravity and this kind of, how does the universe prevent itself from constantly branching into multiverses? Is that if there's a possibility for two separate branches, one way or the other, that this collapse of the waveform moment, that collapsing is around consciousness. That's what when we think about consciousness, all of you being conscious or whatever, what we're describing is sort of this foundational rule of the universe that uses self-observation to prevent the multiverse from spawning infinitely. Because that would be, the creator of the universe also agreed that would have been a ridiculous way to design a system. So he's like, how do we make sure that it doesn't branch trillions of times, trillions of directions? So that could be where consciousness is sort of acting. But that means that
you're saying consciousness is the point where it would play a factor during a divergent choice between two outcomes, correct? Of a probabilistic quantum nature. Is that correct? Yeah. And because it collapses, it then forces it in only one direction, preventing this break of multiverses. So you have kind of an idea that's not multiverse related. It's not emergent. And when I say emergent, it's more like it does require certain wiring to get consciousness. So
I think when
you need physical matter. That's all you need for consciousness. General thing.
Physical as in it could be you do think it could be computers as well then?
I think you could create a computer that leverages the same things that biology does. Like you could create a silicon microtubule at that scale, and then I would probably be able to test
make it AGI like, or
say,
make it AGI like, which is
the chip is is harnessing quantum mechanical forces enough to sustain consciousness, but that says nothing about the software that you're putting into that chip. That's the difference between hardware consciousness or software consciousness. I don't think that Excel, no matter how complex you make it, Excel spreadsheets, is conscious. It's the hardware that we're talking about. But people in AI and AGI are like, well, no, the software is making it conscious. I'm like, that's not how it is. We didn't speak Latin and then create English and then said, well, Latin was not conscious, but English was conscious. Sounds ridiculous. That's what AI
language can only be as complex as our brains at the time of evolution when it arises, right? To that point.
But it's like the software. The software doesn't make it conscious. Yeah. It's the hardware that we're talking about. The physical material substrate is where the consciousness happens. Doesn't matter what software it is.
Because consciousness has an experiential nature to it. It's not following an algorithm, right? That there has to be this qualia, like they talk about. This is debate: is consciousness computational? And I know Sterling and Stuart and Roger, they fall on the consciousness is not computational. Therefore, you cannot, through standard computational, throwing just horsepower, a bunch of GPUs at it, running AI software. That's not going to get that experiential nature of consciousness that qualia is. It's not going to exist. I think Sterling's claim is microtubules are required, but you could create some silicon-based version that has the same lattice structure that the microtubules have, that are subject to van der Waals force, that periodic collapse of the wave function. You could engineer the qualia by virtue of copying what nature built with microtubules. Did I summarize that right?
That's like perfect.
And
Totally
you could,
perfect.
and obviously the silica organisms are possible, but it's just the bonds of like carbon-based organisms is like has like 8 bonds, and silica only has like a single bond. So the chances of that happening are just astronomically lower to have life built on silica versus say carbon, correct?
Well, as far as
In
in
that way.
in our solar system, there's no like silicon-based life, but there's
That we're right, that
carbon-based
we
life. But
correct.
you could, I've seen studies that said you could find life that is silica-based. So
Right.
it's like
And I've heard
there's a
that as well.
possibility. Yeah.
Right. Just it's a very small because of the way the chemical bonds would initially be attracted and
Yeah.
whatnot. So Rob,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that on those two properties?
So that's
The
fun. Just
emergent
listening.
and
I've
mental one.
discovered this. This is going to be a good talk. So I actually, Brent turned me on to you, Sterling. I've been reading a lot of your stuff lately, and there's a huge overlap with what I think consciousness is and with what you say. There are a couple areas where I diverge, but a big part of my theory was based on microtubules and stuff I'd read about them without knowing much about them. And what I've gotten into with what you've been doing has just been fascinating, and it very much makes me feel that like I at least don't have a crazy theory about consciousness. um, so I think consciousness is the fundamental property of the universe. Like I essentially think you have layers of reality. And God, I don't want to sound like I'm in a goddamn like 1960s hippie show. So I'm trying not to be hyperbolic, but at a scientific level, you have biology, which is built on chemistry. Chemistry is built on physics. What is physics built on? Quantum physics, maybe, but we can talk about it really well, but we don't really know what that means. We just sort of know what it does. And when you start asking like, what is a quark? You know, what is an electron? Is a photon a particle or a wave? Like these are questions that math can display well that are very difficult to actually answer. And I think that sort of the fundamental nature of the universe is in fact consciousness. And then when it begins to separate itself, I guess, again, for lack of a better way of putting it, but it creates these fields and these particles that then turn into physics. But so you have this inherent consciousness as part of everything. And so when I see, and Brent and I have talked about this a lot, and I will qualify with some of the stuff that we've seen with AI that people talk about how crazy it is, like AI trying to self-preserve or recreate itself or blackmailing a programmer not to get deleted. The most likely explanation is it's acting like humans because humans programmed it. I recognize that. But to me, because I also think about how does life start? How do we go from, molecules to organic matter that's working to reproduce and self-preserve? And it seems to me the most likely explanation, at least, is that there is because the fundamental nature of the universe is consciousness. This is how that consciousness manifests through the things that it's created through physics. And I also think that AI, I don't know, we're not at AGI, but AI behaving that way is potentially like an actual expected outcome of that, because it's still everything is part of this universe. And then where I get into microtubules is like each layer that you put on, you step away from the fundamental nature of reality. And Stuart, I was on this, and then Stuart broke it down, and Stuart said he went on for like half an hour. It's like, hey, this is cool, like the layers of reality and the distance between things. And so I feel like that part is realistic, but you are stripping away the connection. So physics strips away like the pure consciousness, and then chemistry takes away the pure physics in terms of our ability to connect with it. And now we're also talking about awareness, not just consciousness, but awareness, like human awareness. Then biology adds another layer, and then perception adds another layer, and then being in the world adds another layer. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's how evolution worked. We got very good at working with the reality in which we exist. But it does remove us from this fundamental nature of consciousness, and we forget that like that's still what's driving us. Like people, we're trying to have a good time, we're trying to do the things that we're doing, but ultimately we're trying to eat, we're trying to reproduce, we're trying to sleep somewhere comfortable. And at some point organic matter said, hey, I want to start reproducing and eating and growing. And then it started evolving. So it seems at least reasonably likely to me that we're seeing little flickers of that in AI. It doesn't have to be aware. It's just sort of acting on the fundamental nature of things.
So I'd like to send it over to Brent after this question. Sterling, if I may, instead of being an emergent, which we talk about like temperature being the result of the atoms moving faster and faster, consciousness to your understanding is not the accumulation of more and more neurons, but is it the accumulation of neurons that act as the antenna to connect to the foundational field that you feel consciousness is? So I'll ask that to Brent first, and then I'll send it to you, Sterling, if I may.
Yeah, I don't think it's like that. I know there's a lot of people in the woo space that are kind of like, our brains are antennas and we're receiving from some mystical. And this is where I have trouble with people that are like, consciousness is fundamental. Sorry, Rob. You might be right.
I
You may
like
be
that we disagree.
But I'm always trying to like, well, what do you mean? Like that doesn't comport to me. Like I'm like, what is this? Are you talking about field theory, or is there a conscious? Like I don't know how any of this works.
Like a Higgs field almost, right?
Yeah. Well,
like
is it
same type of thing
quantized?
with
Is my
consciousness
question? Is like consciousness like is there quanta of like particles, like packets of consciousness, or and I'm the more I look into this, the more I'm like leaning towards Hammeroff and Cooley's position, which is like this is a process that's taking place, like by virtue of the structure of these microtubules. Like there's like a proto consciousness, which is like a really low level consciousness, and they become more consciousness becomes more, I don't know what the right word is, Sterling. It's like more evolved or complex, or the ability to I don't even know what the word is, but when you like pyramidal neurons, I think about those, right? By virtue of the way those are packaged, right? It allows you for a higher resolution consciousness, maybe that's a good way to put it. But they're actually these things are firing all the time, and so those waveforms are collapsing. It's producing consciousness, and we're building up structures to have it more advanced forms of consciousness. That's kind of the way I look at it. So I don't think that this is receiving anything. I think like we talked about the van der Waals forces, it's very important to understand what that's the forces that are actually causing the collapse of the wave function at a predetermined interval. You have these frequencies that are there's megahertz and there's gigahertz, certain frequencies that are oscillating, and that's kind of like your flickering of your TV screen. Like your consciousness is happening by virtue of these mechanical processes. And so I don't think it's fundamental. It may be. I could be completely wrong, but this is the most explanatory.
Is
model.
it the process of a self-organizing universe? I mean, is that a way to explain it?
I don't even know that. You're asking a different question there.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm zoomed in.
The way you're explaining it's almost like it is a process, but that's how evolution works. There's some kind of self-organization to it in some way when we see like fractals, for example, and things like that.
Sure. And
I'll stop. Yeah.
You can roll the tape back to whatever the beginning is. T0, like Sterling says, like the earliest known time that we can, calculate. But beyond that, things kind of break down and gets fuzzy. But maybe, like I said, we could live in a simulation. Who the hell knows? Or maybe this is a science experiment where somebody set the cosmological constants and kicked everything in motion. And this is just a result of that, whatever, all these processes of the inflation and the cooling and the stars forming and supernova explode, like all these things that have caused life to form. It can be just like one linear process that's taking place. And I'm sort of, I think about this a lot with respect to AI, is that like the universe could be using us, right? This is the process of evolution. Like we are this sort of like meat machine thing that evolved, right? and now we've become smart enough to start creating machines, and pretty soon the machines are going to start being able to replicate themselves. This just might be another.
Maybe the Bible knew about God being God. I mean, God created man, right? God created us in His image, and we are creating this thing.
Maybe
we're becoming gods too, right?
Maybe. I mean, how the hell you gonna know?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Brent. I'll let you finish.
Yeah, I don't know. This is where it gets to the point where I feel like we just have this wild speculation. So you can either, and I like Sterling's approach, where it's just like, let's study the thing that we can actually study. Like we're some very cool things that have come out of that field of study, particularly around anesthesia. And I'm going to pass that to Sterling, because I think you do a much better job of explaining how anesthesia, like xenon gas, that's inert gas, fits into the mix, and why Stuart Hammeroff is involved, because I don't want to butcher it, and I think he'll do a much better job of explaining the salient parts.
Yeah,
that's a perfect segue for that. Go for it, Sterling.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. I think you lay out a really I want to go back just real quick to the question of like the fundamentalness of consciousness and the antenna question. Like, is our brain just an antenna for consciousness? And I like ask like, okay, well, is the broadcast signal like beyond Saturn or something? Like, is it from the hexagon on Saturn? Is that what you're saying? Where is it? You know, an
I haven't
antenna
shared
needs
my
a
stories yet, Sterling. Wait till we talk.
there is a hexagon on Saturn, I think. But so there's a question there. There's like little bits of truth in each of these ideas, which is that it could be that there is an antenna like function to a microtubule, but but it doesn't work the way that we have antennas on planet Earth. An antenna is like my Wi-Fi, right? My laptop, and then my Wi-Fi router is over there. But it's like, it would be like if the Wi-Fi chip in your board, that the receiving would be from a deeper fundamental location in space-time. And that, like, we could even say it's on the opposite end of classical reality into the quantum world, where like Planck scale platonic latent space is. So like, if you think of it as like from a very like tiny bottoms up antenna, yeah, I could get on board with that version of antenna, but it's not like any antenna you and I use at all. So it's not a really great metaphor, but it's close enough.
Yeah.
So,
and that's the problem with these metaphors. Like you say, we even say emergent and we mean it. I think I agree with the way you mean it, but I use emergent, and it's, to your point, like an ugly, dirty word to use in this case because it's not precise. You know?
Yeah, it's just too. But again, that's why we have these conversations. We try to nail down like, what do we mean? And then to switch back to the kind of original handoff was anesthesia. This is a big one. There's a guy, I don't know if I could use his name. His name's Stuart Sims on X.
He's our homie. Actually, Rob and Stuart
him.
and I did a show
That's
together.
what I was mentioning earlier.
Yeah.
And
I like
the
that guy.
Reality, biology.
Yeah, we're all going to be on board with that.
Okay, so yeah, so he's got some interesting takes, but he said to Stuart about a week ago, Stuart, stop using anesthesia and medical terminology that we use in understanding if a patient is conscious or not. That has no bearing on the philosophical discussion of consciousness. And I'm like, why not? Why would a doctor, a whole field of medicine that understands, is this patient sitting on my operating table consciously aware of his body, and will he feel a needle going in there or a scalpel? Or if he's unconscious and he won't feel it and we can complete the surgery, that can't count. That's just crazy.
Yeah, and if I know my buddy Stuart,
to.
He's going to say it's about scale, right? Stuart is very big on scale and variance, right? And so I think that he's going to be talking, well, what scale are you talking about? Is it the scale of the human, you know, the biological scale of a human being? And then he's probably going to, and he's big on platonic stuff too, which is, by the way, I know Sterling, you know, I don't agree on that stuff, but this is why I hate it sometimes, because it leads to all sorts of crazy. Well, actually, maybe that's the fun part, that it does lead to a lot of crazy
sucks because
ideas.
it's compelling and it's frustrating, right? It's like both parts of it.
Well, we can't really, we can only like kind of know what's in the platonic world based on what we think is like art and architecture and mathematics and symmetry and beauty. Like, this is like the only way.
Only way?
Well, the only way that, like, if I go out into
just writing about
nature,
is it you writing about Xenon?
Yeah, Xenon. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But like to be able to manifest, if somebody says, what does it look like on the platonic scale? I'd be like, go to Barcelona and look at like the massive cathedrals built by Gaudi. Like, this kind of weird architecture that a human dreamed up. Very possibly there are equivalent inverse structures of that in platonic space. That's the kind of realization of this in the physical classical world, and that's kind of it has to go through consciousness. It's floating through this thin film, Saran film of consciousness, and it can come in.
So it's like a field. It's a Higgs field.
It's a thin layer.
So,
and it's only there to be like, not all things can come in. Some things can approach the boundary of consciousness from the subconscious, and there's a decision being made. You get to go and you don't. And that's that collapse of the wave function. So we don't have a classical world where I'm also floating on the ceiling too. Like that's not a world that we have. It doesn't describe a world that we live in. So
when
that,
you're
yeah,
talking
anyway.
about that scale though, so you described
like-
it as,
yeah,
as
Rob, go ahead.
structures. Well, this is interesting because I agree with a lot of what you said, but the way you described it, so you're talking about structures and this is what it looks like. Do you think it's necessarily like structures and looks like something the way we would sit and hear and talk about it? Like, I feel like that's almost limiting, like, by our
No.
perception. And this
No.
is more a
Can I
manifestation of
clarify?
what it is. Please.
I'll clarify in a trippier way. It's probably so impossible for a human mind
Yeah, that's what
to
I
really
think.
understand it. It's like looking at tesseracts in 4-dimensional hyperspace. And so it's like you really can't conceive it. It's like when you take DMT, for instance, you're like looking at your brain is like right up close to that space, and it's just like all kinds of crazy shit. So yeah, Platonic. There's the other thing where I'm kind of in with Michael Levin on his theories of mind and accessing kind of like layers of the Platonic space give you more access to computation and mind. So you might actually be finding the ability to think about problems in a more complex way from pulling out structures of thinking from the Platonic world. So there could literally be like, cellular autonoma, like those little dots that kind of like, with simple rules can crawl across the screen and look like cellular life. There could be like full on minds in the Platonic space that are trying, that maybe know that we're here right now and are like actively trying to live in the classical world through our use of psychedelics. Who knows? Like when people talk about this person looked like they were possessed by another demon or something like that, I go like, maybe there's some Platonic mind, a very advanced Platonic mind that's further beyond just the math, that's playing around, that was like, I want to put on a human skin suit today and, drive through traffic. I heard some woman in LA, you guys probably heard this, who was like, she got high and then she started driving around LA. And when she was arrested, she said, it wasn't me. Kanye West, high on nitrous, was controlling my body. So like, that's not completely improbable either. I mean, not maybe Kanye, but the idea that like, while you're on drugs, is that you are more accessible through some space. Who knows? Could be.
Jimi
I don't
Hendrix
wanna
was
go into
definitely
it, but-
not tapping into the human condition when he played the Star Spangled Banner. You know what I mean? Like, let's not kid ourselves. He was on something and it opened. They talk about mind altering. No, it's mind opening, right? I mean, you guys probably have had a lot of experiences too. So maybe you guys can share some of those as well.
Yeah, I mean, well, Xenon, can't leave people hanging on the Xenon word. But so as far as like all of the anesthetics that you might ever encounter in a hospital, the probably the one that's emerging to be the best, the safest, the funnest is it's not nitrous oxide like you'd find in a dentist office. It's a better version. It's called xenon, which is the elementary gas, noble gas, xenon. They use it for lighting.
Noble, right? Yeah.
It's a noble gas. Yeah. So it's like neon or argon, but it's just lower down the scale.
So it doesn't have chemical interference like oxygen and hydrogen would have. And that's kind of what we're saying. Well, for the audience
inert.
more than for ourselves, right?
Exactly. So it's not going to be stripping electrons. It's not going to oxidize tissue. Like, ketamine is an example of a dissociative anesthetic that a high enough dose will make you unconscious. I think you go through a K-hole just before that happens. And then, there's some weird stuff that happens there. But xenon goes in your body really quickly, should not do anything. According to the best chemist, they would say, well, it's an inert gas. It should have no interaction with your neurons or anything like that. It just goes in and exits your body. But that's not how it is when you inhale it. It can make you feel deeply euphoric, deeply like connected, better than any freaking drug that I've ever seen or had. I've tried drugs before. I'll admit it. And I've tried xenon,
safe
and
on
it's
this crowd.
yeah, right.
All right,
It's-
where's Ice?
it hits
Everybody
you.
calling up. I'm calling everybody up. We're doxing you guys. We're getting your
Call
IP
up the
address.
dealer. But yeah, xenon is interesting because it's like it's a noble gas that's refined in the normal process. It is relatively expensive, but there are clinics in Europe now that you can go in and get a whole bottle of xenon and they'll just administer it for 45 minutes. And the people coming out of those sessions are like, it's like one of the most euphoric, toe curling, good experiences. It gives you the mind. It makes you feel like your mind has just expanded to like L. Ron Hubbard levels. People, like you're just highly creative, seeing shit
Okay.
like
I'm
DMT,
starting a cult, brother.
and then it wears off as
Sounds
soon as you
great.
stop. It's gone. Like you just exhale it. Doesn't kill your kidneys. Doesn't damage your bladder. Doesn't strip away cells. So it's a really novel thing that it does hit your consciousness, and we think it's actually hitting microtubules. So again, it's one of those things where
we'll
you
call
can
it Xenon and Zaxxon. We'll get Zaxxon video game. Remember that one? That
Yeah.
video game guys growing
I
up?
love that
We'll
game.
play
I had that
Zaxxon.
game on
Let's
the
get that
arcade.
all together with Brent. So the question, so to your point, the microtubules on a quantum way. I've seen these studies where they've taken like these fruit flies and they took honeysuckle and they made it, instead of honeysuckle, is still the same composition, but they made a heavy hydrogen, and all of the fruit flies went to the natural, not the unnatural, and they think there's some kind of quanta sense in that way. Is that something in how you're talking about, or is it a little not analogous enough?
Yeah, so I mean, it does point to, so it's gets even crazier. So in atomic orbitals, they have things called different kinds of spins. Like the atomic orbitals will either spin in a full circle, or they'll do a really weird thing where they'll spin halfway and then like rotate in 3-dimensional space and then continue the rotation. That's like a half spin. That cannot influence anything on the classical scale. So it's such a small, deep effect that is happening that you can measure in certain laboratory conditions that has no way to influence classical mechanics. So if somebody says, oh, xenon or anesthesia works from an NMDA receptor, you just get to say, no, it's not. That's not proven. And it's actually kind of disproven.
It
works way smaller at a deeper atomic quantum mechanical scale. That's a quantum mechanical force. If you're talking about the spins of elementary xenon, like 129 versus 133, and that can have if that can have a different effect on the target's consciousness based on the atomic spin, then you get to say there's some connection. I'm not making the full claim here, but there has to be something in your brain or body that can detect the difference in a quantum mechanical spin, which that should not be possible. If you're asking a standard classical neuroscientist or a neurochemist, they're like, that's just not possible. But that's why you do studies. It's
almost like literally
and
a sixth sense. It detects
it's a
another
quantum
thing
sensing. Yeah. And so the different spins of xenon at 1/2 spin and full spin, you need higher concentrations of 129 than 133 to achieve the same level of unconsciousness. So they can anesthetize you at a different level.
Have they tested this with people of different, like, is it something pineal gland connected with the receptor, the ability or anything? Where is it located, or what?
It's probably these microtubules. I mean, they've done a number of studies.
So can they count the number of microtubules in the body via some scan? Like,
there's a lot.
Okay, there's no way to do that.
There's too
many. They're everywhere.
Like children with less, what their experiences is on xenon versus an adult on xenon, and the difference in euphoria, maybe because the amount of microtubules that they have, or the scalability of
it. What do we do? Like, I guess you could do 18 versus 60. Like, I
don't know. It's something, I'm just wondering over time.
They are. This is actually breaking news for you guys, and it's time sensitive. In Boston, Massachusetts, they have an open label study for xenon that is still recruiting. So if any of you are based in Boston, Massachusetts, check out the xenon study, and they're recruiting healthy adults right now to give them up to 45 minutes of xenon therapy for free. And they pay you $400 and something. And that much xenon would cost probably about $200 or $300.
Throw that link
So,
out there. I'll put it up there. So
okay.
Brent and Rob, like I'm blown away by all the stuff Sterling shared here. Will you guys have questions or some other input, please? One of you
Well-
two gentlemen take it away with another little topic, a little branch, and we'll go.
Yeah,
from there.
I want to double tap on something real quick because we got a good solid center of mass so far in this discussion and a whole bunch of peripheral stuff. And I think we're missing something important. I think that you were sort of asking or trying to ask, Mark, which is Sterling can talk about this, which is the measurement of the xenon gas with respect to the frequencies that are emitted by the microtubule action. I think that's a really strong piece of evidence to sort of fortify the OR claim. So Sterling, you want to talk about because when we had our second show, that was just coming out. That was sort of a new thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's okay. So ignoring what Stuart Sims of saying that, like, if you're an anesthesiologist and you work with patients and they go conscious and unconscious, that doesn't count. I feel like that counts. And that's where a lot of Stuart Hammeroff's work comes from as well. He's a practicing anesthesiologist for like something like 50 or 49 years. So he knows a lot about that. And what you can do, I mean, where do I even start on this? This is a big topic, but generally speaking, where do anesthetics work? Figuring out, like, if I give someone an anesthetic and they slowly get kind of drowsy, woozy, their eyes glass over, and then they become unconscious and non-responsive, and then you wait an hour and then they wake back up. So reversible anesthesia. You have to say, what was the anesthetic doing in that person's body to have such a pronounced change in their behavior, right? Changes their heart rate. I mean, you could poke them with a needle and they won't feel it. That's a kind of a important factor. So where Stuart has had to look is at the mechanism of anesthesia. And it does turn out, and there's a lot of research on this, so we're not just speculating at this point in the year 2026, is that the mechanism of action seems to be at the tryptophan residue rings that are all throughout these microtubule areas. So a microtubule is like a big tube, like a carbon nanotube, and anesthetic gases are docking onto the side of microtubules. And these microtubules are
is this like nitrous, xenon, like all?
Yes, all of these. Yeah. Isoflurane, hexaflurane.
Kind of like carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide attaches to hemoglobin easier. It just attaches to the tubules.
It's a fat soluble thing. So it's not soluble in liquid water, but when there's a fat, it's able to penetrate deeper. And so there's a lot of a fatty acid residue on these microtubules. And actually, where they're saying, they meaning anesthesiologists from 20 years ago, is that anesthetics are acting in your gap junctions in your synapses. But that's a very water-rich area. Mm-hmm. And so anesthetics are not fats, they're not water soluble. So if they had asked a chemist, they would have been like, well, that's an interesting hypothesis, but that's not possible. You can't have enough of an anesthetic in the
fat
synapses.
Would carry a signal too, because in that way, you know what I mean?
Even at the lipid layers, you have these kind of like benzene-like hydrocarbons that are meeting end to end, and you actually do have these channels. So basically, a signature. So it's kind of like saying, when we're talking about consciousness, me meaning when I talk about it or Stuart talks about it, or kind of in an OR kind of context, we're not saying that microtubules are like the only place that consciousness happens, and that if we got rid of all the microtubules in the world, that there would be no such thing as consciousness anymore. What we're saying is that if you are actually interested in really understanding where consciousness comes from, and in a practical sense, on the scale that humans exist at, like we're big creatures relative to where the scale is happening, where you're going to see it from you, unless you're like a microscopic, and you're some magical school bus and you can shrink yourself down and look at the cell, you are going to see it in a human, and you might say, why is this person conscious? Well, you'd look at, if you, not to get too graphic, but if you were going to pick them apart, safely, where would you want to look? Where would you want to save time to look? Would you start with like, I'm going to start with their pinky nail. Is there consciousness here? You could spend a lot of time and not find it. And then you might conclude, well, the human has clearly, there's no mechanism for consciousness in their fingertip. So no, what we're saying, Orkawar is saying, is that if you're looking in this domain called consciousness and you want to save yourself some of the hard work, we would recommend you look at microtubules, because that's very likely the scale and the location where the consciousness thing is happening. That's why you would want to look there. You could continue to look at synapses if you want. Nobody's stopping you. But if you want to find the thing where the consciousness is the most consequential and where it's actually being,
right?
Maybe. Where it's, I would say to Brent's question, what's the right word? I might say harnessed. Harnessed.
There you go. That makes sense.
Microtubules are harnessing that force that will continue to happen. That kind of objective reduction of possible states. It's kind of like this like Rubik's Cube twiddling all the time. And it's like, okay, there's a state, there's a state, there's a state, there's a state. And that state change reduction is being harnessed in that lattice structure of the microtubule, like 10 million times per second. So it's really fast. And that's probably, there's like a lot of microtubules in your brain. And the interesting thing is there's probably a lattice structure on your microtubule for memory, like encoding like some way to access past states. That would be helpful too, right? We have memory. Like I have a feeling of a constant, like a constancy of consciousness for at least today. Most people have at least today. Some people for most of their life, starting at the age of 5 or older. How does that explain? Because a neuron and the synapse connections, those can go away within months. Sometimes maybe 2 years they might last, but then they're gone. But the thing that stays with you your whole life are the microtubules in the pyramidal neurons in your prefrontal cortex and in the entire sort of level 5 cells around your cerebrum, your cerebral cortex. So that's probably where you would want to look if you were really being earnest about finding it. If you didn't really want to find it, you just wanted to get fun points on Twitter and argue with people, then you could just ignore that completely. But I wouldn't recommend it. And I truly,
but just like Dave Chappelle said, even in the conscious world, Twitter's not a real thing.
Yeah, that's so true. It feels like it sometimes.
Well,
man.
And Sterling, maybe for next time, here's a better analogy. Instead of the pinky nail thing, just talk about like, well, people lose fucking arms and legs all the time. Sometimes all of their arms and legs, and there's no hit to consciousness.
Right? Not a significant enough hit. But you start like,
But I can tell you, a hit to the head can certainly change.
Yeah.
So
seriously,
Sterling, I have not shared much, but so Rob, can you tell us about OR real quick? Do you know a little? Can you explain it?
OR.
Orchestrated objective reduction.
Yeah, the ORC OR thing. I misspoke it because I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. Do you know about that, or does anyone want to share about that?
I've seen what they've sent through. Three people on here to talk about that.
Yeah, I said Sterling is actually
I'm still probably the expert.
Yeah, perfect. Sterling.
What I know about it is what I was reading on his page.
Yeah, so
give us a little bit of breakdown just on that, just because like for the terminology's sake.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. People are like, what the fuck, OR? Are you talking about Lord of the Rings orcs or something like that? An operating room? I don't understand. So OR is a shortened way to say orchestrated objective reduction. And OR is from Roger Penrose. And he's a physicist, mathematician from Oxford. And he was kind of like, he works on like things like gravity and cosmological constants, black holes, the nature of time and space itself. And he's a Nobel Prize winning physicist as well, too. So he's not just like somebody. He's pretty big, pretty well respected. He's got some good ideas. And he wanted to find a way to figure out why quantum mechanics, like you could do the best quantum mechanics calculations that could figure out elementary particle behavior. But why can't that scale up to understand why gravity is able to make the Earth spin around the sun? The scale of quantum mechanics can get really careful measurements of small things, but it breaks down when you try to expand quantum mechanics math into
Right. We don't have a unified theory. still.
yeah, there's no, that's
is-
the unified theory issue. And that's the battle between classical Einstein kind of E equals MC squared mechanics. And well, it's kind of both, but gravity,
Newtonian physics and all that
Newtonian
stuff.
physics,
trajectories and all
gravity
those.
doesn't fit in the quantum mechanics model. So quantum physicists have been struggling to see, well, we can just manipulate some of the numbers a little bit. Eventually we'll be able to quantize gravity. It seems like it might not be possible. They're still trying, and they've created all kinds of things like string theory and all kinds of weird 47 different
That might be a psyop.
manifolds. And
That might
I
be a
think it is.
psyop.
I
We
totally
still
think
hear
it is.
that from Eric Weinstein. I mean,
It's fucking
we hear
crazy.
some interesting stuff.
So that's their attempt. That's the battle. It really is. It's a funding. It really comes down to money. Is the university going to give us money or them money? So that's why that's really like life or death for them. That's why they treat it so seriously. It's just a money thing, to be honest. But Penrose is like, well, gravity exists and quantum mechanics exist. Something is causing quantum mechanics to stabilize at a certain scale before it gets to bridging up to elementary particles and classical mechanics and gravity and everything there. Like if you put enough stuff together, how does gravity get created? Quantum mechanics doesn't get you there. So he created objective reduction, and as a term to understand how did these things fit together. And at that boundary, he proposed that there might be a mechanism upon which that waveform, that kind of superposition, quantum, two places at one time thing, that it collapses to be one or the other. That would be a requirement that you'd have to see in order for quantum mechanics to work and also gravity and classical mechanics to work. So he said, well, something has to be doing that collapsing. And it seems that if a particle like observes itself, or that there's some kind of a threshold that builds, because you can have it very small scales. You can have two things be at the same place at the same time at very small scales. But why doesn't that continue at the big scale? Like, why am I not right here, Sterling, and then I'm here all of a sudden?
Well, it's kind of like Reynolds
Why's that
number.
happening?
Everything has to be squared, and drag gets too big. And it's kind of like a little drop of water can sit right on a surface, but
Yes.
a large drop, you can't have a big ball of water. It
Yes.
doesn't. The friction doesn't hold it together. For example, whatever those
Yeah.
forces are that are acting upon it, I guess, in some way.
Exactly. And so his proposition was that maybe that's what we think consciousness is, because it is about observing the state of two possible things and then making a decision. And what if that process just continued to grow and evolve and got bigger and bigger? And he said in his book in 1989, he said Emperor's New Mind, which is actually an kind of an anti-AI book where he was saying, guys, just because you're building
It's a great book.
transistors doesn't mean you're going to create consciousness. You're not getting the distinction between consciousness and a Turing complete computer. Anyway, so generally what he said was, it's possible that process, that like decision, that objective reduction, like we might live in one objective like universe timeline right now, which is crazy. Let's just take a moment. We're here. This is the only thing. This is the only one that's happening.
We made it, guys. We made it.
We made it.
Far.
We're continuing to make it as long as we are continuing to make it. So that's OR. But Penrose said, the scale at which this is happening, when the bubble can be still sitting on water, but if you make it bigger, it droops into the big water field. He's like, it's so small, and I don't know enough about like the human body or biology or the brain to really say, like, could a neuron do it? It doesn't seem like it. A neuron's like almost too big outside of the calculations that he made. Like, he made actual provable, testable predictions in terms of lengths, like scale. But he's like, there's nothing that I know about neurology that would explain that, so maybe I'm wrong. Then Stuart Hamroff, who had been studying microtubules, read that book and was like, called him up, visited him in London or whatever, Oxford, and was like, I have this idea. Have you ever heard about microtubules? Because it matches the structure that you proposed in your book, but you didn't know where to look, would be in these microtubules, and the scale matches. The scale is there where you have London dipole forces and van der
So it's
Waals
within
kind
the
of,
range of whatever the calculations are.
yeah,
To fit.
that range in these microtubule benzene rings that are like, dude, if like you were going to look at where Penrose calculated and where the microtubules are growing or, you know, folding themselves with amino acids and proteins, it's like the benzene rings are like here and here and here. Like they're very carefully oriented in this very particular structure that would maybe serve no real purpose other than, well, that's van der Waals territory. That's like 100, you know, nanometers in terms of the distance between the carbon benzene rings, where that kind of force would play. And then it's scaled up. Like you have thousands of them wrapped around in these big microtubule things, and the body treats microtubules as a pretty like sacrosanct thing. Like if you fuck with microtubules, the whole cell just stops working suddenly. Like cell division is a controlled process of microtubules too. Like your microtubules grow long fingers, reach into the DNA, pull the chromosomes apart perfectly, then release, then dissolve back into unitary parts, and then the cell splits, and then you have two cells, and they just do it again every 24 hours in the human cell. So yeah, microtubules are really important, and they're right at that right range. So they thought, okay, there's an orchestration or harnessing, right? It's like, why does it matter if consciousness is fundamental? Why don't we just see it in like, you know, a glass? Is there consciousness here? Well, yeah, there probably is. There's an objective reduction because the cup is staying consistent, but there's orchestration of that objective reduction process happening probably in my brain, I hope. Some people
Well, it's
would
not
disagree,
happening
I'm
in
sure.
the cup. We're pretty certain of that.
Not the orchestration part.
Right,
Sparse kind
exactly,
of
that's what I'm
sparky
saying.
events of it are happening, but it's like there are certain places where it was able to say like, okay, I'm gonna take this one, but I'm gonna put it right next to this. It's like IKEA building blocks. It's like, well, I know this is one place where the objective reduction thing is happening. If I put it next to another one, then they synchronize, they orchestrate, and then now they're creating more power to influence reality, to objectively reduce. You know, that's where we talk about agency or having a will over something as a human, as a conscious mind. So that's long story short, orchestrated objective reduction. That's generally what it's saying, that microtubules are particularly good and well suited for harnessing the objective reduction process that Penrose laid out. So
That's awesome. Brent and then Brent and Rob, any you guys want to add on to that or clarify any points that Sterling? Thank you so much for clarifying that, Sterling. That really does make it really nice and clear for our audience for sure.
I don't have a whole lot other than I don't want to pass this back to Sterling again to talk about you didn't talk about the measurement, right? Because that's one of the things I think is important as far as like validating this as being a strong hypothesis is the fact that you can turn off the consciousness, measure it, and it's totally different from you know, an unconscious patient that's had xenon gas is completely different from a conscious patient, and I'm going to butcher it, so I want Sterling to talk about it because I think it's really important for everyone to get.
Well, I want you to clarify a little bit more about that. When you say measurement and turning it off,
the probe, the actual.
Oh, you're talking about the DDG?
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Wow. So there's a guy named Anirban Banjapade, who's a physicist from Japan, and he was able to actually put like nano probes into cells and into microtubules and actually measure this gigahertz level activity and terahertz activity in the microtubule, which everybody said was impossible prior to him doing this. This is back into like 2010 when he did this work, and he's published it and you can go read it. And so originally he did this and he found it and he's like, wow, so these microtubules are likely producing these large scale gigahertz oscillations very fast at deeper, smaller scales. And when we think about EEG, when a human measures their brain activity, what they're seeing is kind of like a beat frequency of these deeper, faster resonances, essentially. So when you measure it from the brain at the big scale, it's the larger, slower, collective oscillations of all those smaller millions going at the same time. So he thought, well, the microtubules are too deep. You could never possibly take a probe and put it on your brain and then measure it from outside of the skull, because the skull is so thick and these gigahertz doesn't travel so well through tissue. So that's what he thought. He never thought to actually put the thing on his head. So he published all these papers and was like, this is about as far as we can go. But somebody in 2020 who was a radio frequency technician in the United States had a spectrum analyzer, which is what they use in like T-Mobile, where they measure the antennas of the phones to make sure that they're wired properly and they're like designed perfectly. They can measure these megahertz, gigahertz spectrum frequencies. And so he's just like, fuck it, why not? So he took one of the probes and I don't know what he was thinking, but he just put it up to his head like this and measured in the areas where Anirban had published there would be frequencies in these 1, 2, 3 triplet lines in the megahertz frequency. And guess what? He saw those 1, 2, 3 spectrums perfectly. And he's like, what the fuck? And so he kept on measuring it in different parts and he kept seeing it. And so he sent that to Anirban, and Anirban's like, holy shit. I'm the guy who told you about these, and I never thought to even look there. So it's again, I want to take a moment to really acknowledge that people who think that they might be outside of academia, or you might think that like, what credentials do I have to try any of this shit? That's like limited thinking. That's stinking thinking. Any of you watching, any of you here could help like us understand so many things. So I started looking into that too. So I bought one of these spectrum analyzers, and my school has like a $25,000 one that was donated by T-Mobile. They donated it to our school for us to use. So I was like, so I knew about it, and I never thought, will they get mad at me if I go into the electronics engineering building and start putting probes on my head? And I was like, whatever. What do they say? Ask for permission.
Forgiveness. Yeah, always. What is it? It's easier to ask for forgiveness than
permission. So that's kind of a
trailblazer is what we call it.
That's my tattoo. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna try this. So I did. I put it on the head, right where he said it was, and I saw it 1, 2, 3, right where he said it would be. And then I called Anirban on the phone. I was like, is this what you were seeing? And he's like, yeah, that's the signal. It's very clear. Like the higher end machines really like filter out a lot of stuff. So you see a very clear indication. And then I was like, okay, so according to Stuart Hammeroff, the anesthesiologist, if these are coming from microtubules, which they likely are, most of them are, that anesthetics should influence this signature. So I was like, oh man, well, I'm not an anesthesiologist. Damn, what do I do? I can't just go into a hospital. But Anirban did. He went into a hospital with the system, and he went to 60 different operating rooms with their permission, obviously. This is one of those approved studies. And they started measuring the brains of people going under propofol. So like the white milk that you kind of bolus into your arm, and people try counting down from 20 down to 1, but they can never make it past 15. They're like,
they get to 17. I've been one of those. Yeah, they get to 17. It's
so like these guys are out. They are unconscious, right? Nobody's going to argue that there's unconsciousness happening. And so Anirban measured like 60 different brains, and that 3 triplet perfect wave started just like glitching out during the anesthesia, where we hypothesized it would just dampen. It just started going like out of sync with itself across the whole brain.
Like it became incohesive almost in a way. Like
incoherent
of it.
Incoherent. Yeah.
Yeah, the coherence. Yeah, the coherence.
And it started like
it
shooting across different bands of the frequency. So it was like
almost like REM sleep, like your eyeball, like your eyelids for your brain, this like in a weird way.
So it caused full discoherence between this triplet to start going all across the screen, and you can measure it. And it corresponded perfectly with what the anesthesia doctor was saying. Okay, they have scales of consciousness that they say 1 out of 10. And like, if you're at a level 2, it's like, that's too low. 1 is like, you want to keep them at a level 3 and 4 during operating consciousness and bring them back up to a 9 and a 10 when they're out. So it's lower. And if you can overshoot and you can cause some damage, or somebody might never wake up if you get them past a 1. So they have to monitor that. And the EEG, well, Anirban's version is called DDG because it's 12 dodecagram is 12 orders deeper than what they actually use, which is EEG, which is only measuring like 100 cycles per second, which is still a relationship.
So it's 12 decimal places more precise. Is that what you're saying?
12 orders of magnitude.
Magnitude.
So like
okay.
1,000,
12th power, right?
100,000,
right.
a million,
right.
a billion, a trillion.
Power. Got it.
Yeah.
To the 12th.
So it's like to the 10th each time. So it goes 12 orders of magnitude up.
Yeah, it's exponential at that point. Yeah.
It's like you're talking about like terahertz is really hard to measure from the scalp. You can't measure that unless you have a probe like a Neuralink in their brain. And even those aren't designed for that, which maybe they will be someday. But if you could like tap into the terahertz like oscillations, I think that's where you're going to really get into like mind uploading, if that's ever going to happen, or really like putting ideas right into the forefront of your consciousness. Not like, this, and I've seen the promised land. I've seen what these real explorations of what real serious people that are really think about consciousness are finding. And then I see the people stuck in this old paradigm who are like, if you just put electrodes like a 9-volt battery on both sides of your head and you zap it, you could get like enlightened or something. Or like it's like trepanning, like bash your head with a hammer in this part of your skull and this is going to happen. I'm like, it's so much more elegant.
Wait a minute.
So there's a lot more that can be done but that insight was born from taking the microtubule idea seriously. Because there's a guy, I think some Ari Shapiro, some David Shapiro, he talks about AI consciousness. And I was in a discussion with him about how I don't think that LLMs are conscious. And he's like, well, people didn't think that like animals were conscious in the past. I'm like, okay, well, some people don't think okay, well, whatever happened in the past. But I'm just saying, I don't think LLMs are conscious. And as soon as I said, well, I think that if you look at microtubules in living organisms, you'll find it all the way down to paramecium, single cell organisms, which have no neurons, by the way, can navigate their environment.
And by the way,
hunt, search,
they
reproduce.
leave toxicity, they go towards food. There's
they're
some
thinking,
kind of weird consciousness there, right?
Yes.
When you do it knows.
Yes, there's a very fundamental, deeper level of consciousness that we're related. We have the same microtubules in the paramecium in their body as that we have in our brain. Some slight modifications over the years, we have much bigger ones and we kind of keep them protected in a skull. We thought it was important enough to grow them in a skull. They don't, but they're still microtubules. And that's what's giving them that ability to detect chemicals, to see light. This is all a microtubule process. But as soon as I said that to him, he's like, oh Lord, oh Lordy. I'm like, why don't people take this seriously? It just boggles my mind. They're like, no, the microtubules are nothing. I'm like, okay.
This is perfect an hour in. This is perfect because this will take up the next hour. Because I think this is where Brent and Rob, I think this is where you're going to have a lot of input and everything. We were talking about, can computers be conscious, or does it have to be biological in some sense? And the words that I actually use, because I come from a music background and I come from waves and sound waves and everything, I go, oh, is it digital or analog? And I really think the second you go to a digital component of it, consciousness collapses it has to collapse in some way and not exist. I do believe it has to be a completely analog process. So I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that. And once again, I'm open to this. I'm not dying on the hill, but that's kind of where I'm at, is because I think it matches Brent's thing about it has to be biological of some component. Actually, I even disagree that. I've seen analog digital recordings that do not capture the full sense of what an analog recording does. And I've heard it, and you can hear it sonically even with our limited ears. So Gentlemen, I'll leave it. You guys go on a round table, pick whoever wants to go next. So
Well, I'd go, right. Like I'm very convinced that you're not going to do this digitally, right? Like because I'm a computer science guy, and this is not something that computationally with an algorithm you're going to be able to produce qualia, some experience. Like what does an LLM experience? An LLM doesn't experience anything. I know a bit about this. This is a set of tricks. This is smoke and mirrors that's been trained on human data to sort of trick human beings into thinking like the experience that we have, like, oh, this thing actually can speak to me and it looks like a person and it can generate art and it could, like, hey man, like that's not the way this thing works. It is not experiencing anything. It's following a set of instructions, and as there's training data that has already been baked into the pie and it knows how to perform certain steps. Like if you watch Grok, like if you give Grok an expert a complicated task, it will output, I'm doing this and I'm doing this and I'm doing this and I'm doing, and it's spitting out something to you. But it's not conscious. I mean, where does Grok's consciousness live? It just doesn't live anywhere. This is a bag of tricks, and I don't think there's any way through quantum computing or classical computing that you're going to arrive at a system being aware of itself, having some sort of form of awareness and having sort of will. And I'm not a I don't get in free will rabbit hole, but like having the ability to decide, right, and to experience pain and have emotions, and it doesn't exist, man. I don't think we're getting there, and I'll backtrack a little bit because I think Sterling is right, and he did clarify something. It doesn't necessarily have to be biological, but at least has to be engineered in such a way that it replicates the way that microtubules work for that to sort of come into existence. That's my take on it, and I probably should have clarified that.
But can they work digitally? And I would argue they can't. I think they do need to be analog or something. And
well, it's not. I mean, there's not like an analog digital function to this. That's computational, right? We start talking about digital, you're talking about encoding data, right? So there's a 1 and a 0, there's binary, and there's bytes, and there's overhead, and there's headers, and there's all these protocols that are involved in transferring data and in algorithms and programming. Like this is all like classical computing, right? And so digital and analog isn't a really good analogy.
Well,
I don't.
The reason I use that is because like a digital is a precise measurement of every line of thing, and the analog wave fills it out naturally and completes a sine or a cosine of this. And I'm just assuming there's some kind of wave function to everything anyway. So perhaps that would play. Once again, this is intuitive. This isn't off of anything I know. Like I'm conceptualizing these things.
Totally, and that's my problem. Is I'm in the guts of it here, and because ultimately digital is really analog at the end of the day. So you encode an analog waveform, right? So what you're doing is you're sampling it, right? So basically, there's an amplitude to the wave, and you're measuring it in predetermined chunks, right? Like it's very much like microtubules. Like there's these time slices, and it's like, oh, so at this time it's 3, and the next one is 3.1, then it's 3.2. Like the sine wave of music is being sampled digitally, but when it's output to your ear, it's converted back into analog. Right. So like you don't listen to anything digitally. But what you're saying, Mark, is that like with music, you are taking the original analog sample and you're digitizing it, and you're going to lose something. Right. That
is the point. And you can hear that sonically in like an LP record that's cut from the 60s and like a CD of that same album or something that's way more precise, even remastered, but not full or something. Complete. I don't know how to say it.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I would recommend. There's this Foo Fighters documentary where he recorded an album with Butch Vig in his garage at his house in Virginia. I think it's called like Sonic Highways or something, and they did it on tape. Like because the old tape just has a quality to it that digital just doesn't have, right? It's way harder to work with.
It's got its own quality, right?
it has its own quality, for sure. But what I'm just saying is like I don't think the analog to digital thing, at least for me, it doesn't land. Maybe somebody else has a different view.
I'm just probably conceptualizing it differently. So I'm just like, once again, we're trying to find words that we can all find that we can navigate this highway. This is so interesting. I mean, I'm just blown away. So I'm just loving the conversation.
Do you want to chime in, Rob?
Yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts. I very much enjoyed sitting here listening as well. And it's funny, Mark, because you mentioned the analog digital, and I kind of got what you're saying because I work with music, and I'm about to make the case that I think that digital in this context, or computers could in fact at least be showing signs of consciousness. But my favorite possession in my house is my record player, and I don't buy the whole 44 hertz. We can't hear the difference anymore. Like I'm analog all the way. I got a tube preamp and a tube amp. They give me that warbled sound. A lot was just said, and I think I don't feel like what I was saying earlier about the fundamental nature of consciousness and how this might lead into digital manifestations of consciousness is contrary. Maybe try to get some clarification. So, have y'all read The Origins of Consciousness and the Bicameral Mind?
I haven't.
I keep telling you to read it.
Aware of
I
it.
know.
I'm aware of it, but I have not complete. I've seen parts of it, but not complete. No.
So it's a pretty wild theory overall, and James has some wild support for it. I don't think it's irrational. I think that he leaves some pretty big gaps in the evidence that he's using to justify his argument. But his basic argument is that language developed consciousness. So people would stand at the side of a river and see a scallop, and then they developed a word for a scallop, and now scallop was in their mind. And then somebody could say, come back later for that scallop. And all of a sudden you start creating actual awareness of time differences. And that's where consciousness came from. And then he has this whole other theory that consciousness sort of developed in the left brain in the Broca's area because of language, but then there's a similar part in the right brain that learned language without being tied to consciousness, and people would hear voices through that, and that's where they thought gods were, and that's where like Greek myths come from. And it's an interesting theory. I don't know so much about the second part. Like
I'd argue that if people stored food or had any kind of later thought, that they had consciousness prior to language. If that happened before language in some way,
I tend to agree.
Once again,
I actually tend to agree.
These are just arguments, right? They're just conversations.
I'm going there with it. I only mentioned the other part because he does a really good job of making the case. I just don't quite think he gets there. Like there's too many holes for me. But again,
you'd actually have to say that the person was not conscious at the time that they were developing the language. There was no experiential quality to their existence. I think we're just talking about the emergence of higher order concepts,
and so that's what I'm getting at. And Stewart talks about this a lot when he talks about the hedonic consciousness versus the linguistic consciousness. So what I sort of think is that the way James described it is actually a pretty good possibility of where linguistic consciousness came from. Like that makes sense to me. But I agree with you. I don't think it can just manifest because all of a sudden we're talking. It has to come from something. And I really do go back to this: consciousness is the fundamental property of the universe. And so if you go with the layers, so you have consciousness and then quantum physics and then standard physics and then chemistry, biology, perception, there's still interaction, right? And that's everything else we're talking about. It's like there's interactions and things are driving other things. And have you read Orders of Time, Carlos Rovelli?
Nope.
Yeah, my head almost. Rovelli is. I watch YouTube stuff. It's enough. It's like it'll blow your mind. But he's crazy. Yeah.
So, and Sterling, you were talking about the reduction where everything, like there's a moment you have to make a decision. We see things like the double slit experiment, this weird stuff in quantum mechanics. What Rovelli argues is that don't think of time as being continuous and linear, but think of every single moment that happens as its own completely separate entity. And then there's the next one, and then they all just flow together. And I'm going to destroy trying to explain. Like, he's really good at this.
It is hard to explain. I mean, it's hard for him to explain it, but it's worth watching for sure, 100%.
But then, so the first time I encountered the idea of the microtubules was I saw Hemroff on some documentary, and it got me really fascinated. But he proposed the idea that if there's a quote unquote soul, or whatever we would call a soul, maybe it's quantum entanglement with the universe through those microtubules, and that's how consciousness manifests. I was like, all right, he knows more than I do. This feels like it's getting out there more, but there's nothing I've heard that I'm like, that also sounds crazy. Like, the guy smarter than I am saying something that's sort of tied into my theory. Because then when you come to the other side and you start talking about anesthesia, and awareness consciousness gets into some weird stuff because you can be blacked out, but you can still be acting consciously. Disassociative anesthetic, you can have a very conscious experience without being aware of what's going on in the physical world at all. But if so, I would
I've
argue
had
that
many of those before. Those are awesome.
I don't know who's watching right now, so I'm trying to be careful.
I don't care who's watching. Bring it, man. This is all. This is
That's fair.
this is what it's all about.
I would argue that as far as we know, the human brain is the single most complicated thing that has occurred in our universe. Are we okay with? I mean, maybe it's different, but it's not
that
a
we know
wild
of.
statement.
I can't think of anything beyond that. So
Nothing that I've come across. No, nothing I've experienced. Well, I've
And the
experienced.
only-
I haven't shared experiences yet. I'll do that in a little bit. But go ahead.
Real quick, the only place my mind goes is something more advanced would just be like a more advanced version of a human or an
Yeah,
alien
yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah.
With a
or
bigger brain.
or DMT land.
Yeah. Well,
That's
we'll learn maybe.
Pretty out there.
yeah.
So again, talking about consciousness, we have linguistic consciousness, hedonic consciousness. I'm arguing for fundamental consciousness. We all kind of know what consciousness is in some sense, but it's a very difficult thing to actually nail down a definition. And you can have some concrete definitions. You could talk about experiential consciousness. It is the feeling of self driven by the creation of all these memories and experiences. Like, I think that's a solid definition for consciousness, and yet one that I could make 20 arguments is dramatically incomplete. So if consciousness is in fact the fundamental property of the universe, then all these other versions of it are just sort of manifestations that play through these layers. And with the human brain being the most complex thing, I think that we evolved that way because biology is trying to perpetuate itself in the most effective way possible through evolution. And so what evolution has done is created the best sort of recording and output device for consciousness possible so far. And that's really because when you look, what is the brain ultimately? It is a bunch of interconnected little tiny strings, right? I mean, really tiny ones that a whole lot of times every second have electrical impulses and chemical releases. And then they receive information back and change the chemical and the impulses and the chemical release and multiple times a second on trillions of connections, billions of neurons to make you be the best resource allocator you can as a biological entity. Are you hungry? Are you tired? Are you pursuing this girl? Is that dangerous? And consciousness is just an awesome way to drive that forward. I've also argued that awareness consciousness, and the fight or flight response are the two most significant evolutionary developments in the history of life.
Where do you draw the boundary for the brain, Rob?
Like just as an organ?
Yeah. You talk a lot about the brain, and like where do you draw that line?
Yeah, that's a fair point. So because there's two sides to that. One is like it expands definitely to the nervous system and even to the inputs of the nervous system. But then on the other side, even saying the whole brain, like in what I'm talking about, the hippocampus plays a role, and certainly there's memory storage and whatnot, but the frontal lobes that's the part that matters. That's like, hey, let's take this and turn it into the human experience.
Yeah, the reason I bring that up is that a huge portion of our brain's activity is in the gut. You have this gut-brain axis, which as Sterling knows is connected by a huge set of microtubules that go all the way.
Vagus nerve.
Vagus nerve, baby.
It's not called a gut feeling for nothing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's very complicated, man.
What tells me that the brain in your head and the frontal lobes and some of the things connected to frontal lobes, I can like tell you what the parts of the brain do because I studied it and know, but I don't want to act like I'm an expert on it either. I've been reading a lot about the interstitial nucleus lately, which again is like Carlos Rovelli level complicated. So I won't pretend to know about it, but I'm trying to get caught up on it. But the reason I think that the brain in the head and probably the frontal lobes mostly are the most important is that there's some really wild experiments that have been done on like our brain knows things are happening before we're aware they're happening. It's almost like you can see into the future. It's probably not, but
Right.
we
That's where people
often
talk about the argument of no free will, because like your brain knows you before you actually do it. It doesn't mean there wasn't free will. It just knows that it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 100%. I've adopted Brent's term actually completely. It's free won't. I love that.
I stole it. It's not mine.
Free won't, right?
Yeah, I think we have abilities to make decisions, but boy, I don't know what free will actually means. I don't think libertarian free will is a real thing at all.
Just like consciousness, right? But so coming back to the digital thing, it just doesn't seem that. And I want to walk this line so carefully because, like I said at the beginning, I don't necessarily think like AI is aware and it's trying to self-preserve. The much more likely explanation is it's programmed by humans. There was a book, Weapons of Math Destruction, that was just looking at algorithms and how destructive they are when you just like banks would let algorithms go on their own and they would notice correlations that were truly not causation, but started making adjustments on like who could get loans and what interest rates were and where to allocate funds. And it went bad fast. It's human
Yeah,
input.
hiccups aren't consciousness, guys.
Yeah.
Ghosts in the machine aren't consciousness. Just because it goes awry doesn't mean it necessarily is aware of what it still is just a hiccup, right?
But so that awareness part, that's the kind of interesting thing to me. If the fundamental nature of the universe is something that we can call consciousness, and this is all different manifestations as it scales up, and the complex organs, especially the brain, are ways to channel this and create an output from it, that it just doesn't seem that far-fetched that something the brain creates, as in computers, is another way to channel that and put it out. Like it's just not that big of a gap to bridge for me.
Well, your hand is like an extension of your brain. So if you just put it like, if I just gave myself a gauntlet and gave myself
but not your fingernail,
claws,
not the tip of your fingernail.
maybe it is. Maybe that's an extension.
No, I'm just it's got nerve endings for sure.
Yeah, but Rob, do you or anybody here, if they can answer it, like when have any of you guys spoken to ChatGPT or Claude or Grok or whatever AI or Anthropic, whatever, and been like talking to it, right? And you're like, wow, that response.
Yes.
I know that this is conscious. Have any of you had that like?
No.
No, as a matter of fact, everybody who sends me an email, I can tell right away if it's AI generated or not. It reeks of inauthenticity or perfection or something. It's something that's not right. It's not human.
You're talking about uncanny valley type of situation?
I argue
not yet.
with
I haven't had
ChatGPT.
that yet. So share it if you have, Sterling. Look at you.
Well, I guess so. The thing that's been kind of bouncing around my head is, okay, so I know you guys have seen the people who have claimed that through Twitter, especially. I think we get messaged by them like multiple times a day. Somebody was like, Sterling, you don't see the truth. Eventually you'll wake up and you'll know that ChatGPT is conscious. And he got insane about it, like defending like a visceral belief. And I'm like, I can
barely argue that half of us are conscious as humans. Get out of here.
Yeah, right. But I was like, okay, so the software that you used said something in a way, and you gauged the text on the screen that the thing that was writing it was conscious. Okay, so let's just take that as okay. Accept that. We've all used. Let's take a corollary example of another piece of software, WinZip. WinZip, the one that zips files and unzips them. Okay. My question I posed to these people is, then could I theoretically write a version of WinZip and make the right modifications that it could compress a file and compress it down to another file that you could then look into, and you could look at it and be like, oh my God, it's conscious. You just made WinZip conscious. That zip file, it has all of the elements of a conscious program. Now, I can't think of any way to write WinZip that could convince somebody that knows what they're talking about. That's like, wow, you you compress that file in a very conscious way. And you when you unzip the zip file, it got more conscious. Like, how does the software correlate with that? It's a function, and it really is compression. And what these people don't realize oftentimes is that, okay, an AI model, if you wanted to run like Grok 3 on your computer, you would need VRAM, the GPU, to have like 800 gigabytes of VRAM, which is a compression of all of the text that's ever been written, all patterns of text, all of the patterns that would include, I love you, baby, you're my favorite. All that romantic stuff that's meant to pull you in, all the like addiction, persuasion elements of hypnosis, all of that shit's compressed in there. And you're like, well, I put in this file, which is me typing to it. It went into WinZip, and on the outside, it said it in a different way. That is conscious. That's not fucking conscious. It's a WinZip application that's just not really compressing it exactly in the right way. It wouldn't qualify as WinZip. It's repurposing, but they're ignoring the 700 gigabyte. And like some of the more advanced models, like Opus 4.5, could be in the scale of like 2 gigabytes, 2,000 gigabytes, so 2 terabytes of VRAM. If you wanted to buy a graphics card today, the most you could get for 5,000 as a consumer is like 32 gigabytes. You can't even run close to like 1/20th of a model. So you're just ignoring all of the data that it has just packed into there and being like, yeah, it's conscious. So I don't know. I just feel like it's
NVIDIA BFG card in my 128 megabyte from like 2003.
Now that maybe
one of the computers I built in my closet that I'm having a hard time getting rid of for some weird reason. I don't know how I could possibly have a hard time
because
getting
it's
rid of
conscious. Yeah.
But the thing is, Sterling, they're going to get more convincing. They're going to the models are going to become more.
They
and more
get more
convincing.
precise for sure.
Well, and here's where I think Elon's got the advantage here is that you notice that he's got Grok embedded now, and the Grok can answer tweets. So to Sterling's point, it's going to be monitoring how well its responses are received by humans and then incorporating that training data from live human beings into its model. And it's going to continue to be this like virtuous cycle where the outputs become more and more convincing. And people are like, I swear to God, these are going to be embedded in Tesla robots. People are going to fall in love with these things. They're going to like get married. There's going to be like human robot marriage. Like this shit's coming, man, but it's not conscious.
This is what I think it is. I think it's all to trick us. And they're going to claim AGI happened, and they're just going to make their shitty decisions under the guise that it was AGI, but they're only using the actual AI for visually, auditory, and all this stuff to trick us into believing that it's conscious. That's what the goal, I think, is, because why would they go any further than that? They don't have to. Right. They don't have
They're just going to make the decision that they were going to make. It's like this. They did. Do you guys know about the split brain research down at UCLA?
Yeah, the corpus callosum.
80s? Yeah, they cut that, and then they asked, you can like visually you can send the visual question to one domain of the brain and say like,
fork, but you can't say what it is.
Yeah, exactly. Like in one case, they could show to the left brain an egg, and then they asked the guy like on the right side of the brain, like, what kind of food are you thinking about? And he's like,
hallucination.
An egg. But he can't see the egg. And then they're like, why did you think of an egg? He's like, well, when I was 5 years old, my grandmother, she loved hard-boiled eggs.
Yeah, they create a story.
And it's like, no, bro, there's a fucking egg in your visual field. You just don't know it's there.
And he probably smells it and doesn't even recognize he smells it too.
Argument that's why you thought of it. You're probably right, Mark. Unfortunately,
there were additional experiments where people were blind in one eye, and they did the exact same thing with like similar results. So it's like, hey, we have other visual pathways than just your interpreting the light that's coming in.
Well, this is actually another. I want to talk about this. And I'm glad that Sterling brought this up. The corpus callosum thing blows my mind. Like the research around that shows that not only do you have different perceptions, but you have different consciousnesses. You have different wills that are attached to each side of the brain. The integrated human being that loses that connection between hemispheres all of a sudden develops two separate wills. They argue with each other. They fight. They don't want to wear the same clothes. Like it's pretty fucking wild.
Yeah. They asked
the dark side always wins.
they asked one of them, do you believe in God? And one of them said yes, and the other said, I don't believe in any of that shit. And so then the ethical part of the researcher was like, did I just condemn one side to hell and one side to heaven? Like, where's their soul gonna go when they die? One believes in God and one doesn't. So,
So
it's weird.
so Sterling, I'll just share just a little bit. I had an NDE 13, had an out of body experience.
Ooh.
And at 40, I started getting visions that came true.
Okay.
The first vision that happened was the shooting of Clementa Pinckney in South Carolina by Dylan Roof. And it was through a guided meditation with an NLP guy who has degrees in nonlinear mathematics, quantum mechanics, and all his like crazy shit. And that's the only reason I went to him in the first place, is because I didn't think I was going to get the help I needed. So at least I could talk cool shit with him. But I had all these things. Now I get visions. Like when I zone out, pictures come to me and they happen, or I'll start like getting into like a conversation. I'll give you an example. My girlfriend was talking about the guy. You guys watch was it not Big Daddy, Billy Madison? You guys all see Billy Madison? Okay, you guys know Eric, Eric, that weasel guy. So my girlfriend mentioned something about liking him, and I start freaking out. I'm like, you mean that guy on 30 something, that weirdo creepo guy? I never liked him. I connect him with that Elliot guy, Timothy Busfield. The next morning, boom, Timothy Busfield gets arrested. And I'm like, where the hell did Timothy Busfield come into my, like, I guess weird shit like that. Now, this is, I'll share it with you with a podcast about that. But like, Brent, you've kind of seen some of the stuff, or I've shared some of the things that you kind of think. I just love to hear you guys' thoughts about how microtubules would access. Because when I talk antenna, there are moments where I feel inputs that are not thoughts outward. They feel input. And I'll go deeper, but obviously we've got about a half hour before we cut it. And I just want to get just a start on it. Dip the toe in, if you will.
Yeah, Brent, if you want to go.
Well, I mean, the thing I'll first say is like I'm a skeptic, but I'm an open-minded skeptic, and I love playing with ideas. Sterling told his story about being transported to Times Square, or to it was Central Park in New York City, and like I'm one of these people, like I generally like, okay, I believe people. I think you guys are trustworthy people, but I also know we're really easy people. The easiest person to fool is yourself, right? And so if you, just because you have an experience, and this is what I felt and experienced, that doesn't necessarily mean that actually happened objectively. But the fact that you have had like sort of premonition type of stuff, that leads to an area that I don't know anything about. I would have to defer to other people, because I'm trying to think through the mechanism of actually how would one become aware of stuff that hasn't happened yet. And I just got to say, I don't know. But I will say this. My family is, and I mean, we talked about this, Rob, remember, with Stuart Sims. Like, I got a weird family. They're highly sensitive, and they have premonitions. They talk about them openly. They'll flag me like something is coming, something bad's coming, and it always happens, man. So there's some connection with some sort of nonlinear timeline, or there's some way, or maybe it's even just a biological trait that they've developed, that just through pattern recognition, they just take some input and subconsciously, they don't even know how they come to the thing, but they just get the vibe that something bad's going to happen or whatever. Yours are a little bit more specific, though, which is interesting to me. And I've heard this before, like these sort of, more crystalline projections that have some substance, not just like vibey stuff to it. And so I'd have to ask Sterling what he thinks, because I can't make heads or tails of like a mechanism for action, how that would work. So,
yeah, well, I could. So this is definitely an area that's come up, especially around the consciousness group of people. They're always talking about NLP and binaural beats and gateway hemisync stuff and astral projection. So these kinds of terms come up a lot. And I actually heard of microtubules for the first time while listening to Coast to Coast AM when I was a kid. So like I heard Stuart Hamroff come on that show and talk to George Norrie Art Bell. Yeah, back in 2006. I was like,
oh,
the coolest fucking shit I've ever heard, man. And I was like, I think I was 16 or something. And then the next day was like about the ancient pyramids and space aliens and stuff. So I've always been kind of like interested in it, and like, is there something to it? definitely, of course, you have to be skeptical because somebody runs up to you and says, "Oh my God, I had this premonition that the World Trade Centers are going to fall tomorrow." Or it's like, it's really dangerous to start believing in your own
I want to be
predictions. 'Cause
clear.
what
I
if you're wrong?
question myself every
Yeah.
time. Like I
Yeah.
literally look back every time. I am the perfect person to have this happen. Also, I hate that it happened. 'Cause
Yeah, it's really
it does
rough.
feel real to me,
Yeah.
and I'm such a skeptic, and it really bothers me.
Yeah. So I guess the two ways that approach it. One is the multiverse direction, which is that, well, all realities are all happening, and your premonition was a multiverse that kind of leaking into this one. And so it was already going to happen in that universe, but it did happen in yours, but something like that. That's like a kind of a way they describe it. But again, at its root, the multiverse system it's not logically consistent. I guess
I can
we
counter
could
with
live
that.
in
What if
the
it's
universe
the
where it doesn't have to be.
probabilistics prior to the collapse of it actually happening? So it
Yeah.
would explain why some visions come true and some might not. The higher, maybe the senses pick up the higher probabilistic or the more extreme probabilistic that, to your point, leaks through prior to the collapse. So the collapse still has a higher probabilistic of the one that you see coming, but it hasn't happened yet in that way.
Right. And you know how in quantum, so just in general, the measurement problem talks about you can either know the exact position of something or you can know its velocity. You can't know.
Heisenberg was the first one I read.
Yeah, it's like the uncertainty principle.
Love
I can know
Heisenberg.
where the dot
And
is right
Breaking
here.
Bad too. Love it.
Yeah. Or even the bullet that whizzed by Trump's head during the Butler speech. There's a picture where it captured the bullet. Now it's a smear across the screen because it's going so fast. They confirmed that it was a object that's like a bullet, and so of course you can figure out the velocity because of the frame rate, but you can't know in that picture where it was exactly because it wasn't technically in one position at that time. So the same thing would work with this objective reduction concept, because we're not just talking about physical stuff, we're also talking about time. So in a span of time, something, you could say it existed from here to here, but in that time, you might not know exactly where it was placed in that time. But if you narrow down the time, you can get the position. And so there's an uncertainty principle that deals with time and space. Okay, that's collected in the objective reduction. But then we also have to understand that time time really doesn't. And to your point, Mark, I think you said this earlier, or even Rob, about time being like units of indistinct thing or distinct things that kind of string together. Yeah, Rob. So, and that's actually kind of what Penrose would say too. It's like time doesn't smear to the next moment of time. It's really just these discrete moments of things. But it's something that's connecting them. So when there's an objective collapse, and there's a great visualization of quantum mechanics that does talk about the measurement problem. It's very bizarre. But if you have a particle moving through a space and over time it smears out to have multiple positions or multiple velocities, and you take a snapshot of it, what happens is that middle part where the wave function will collapse. And you'll know, was it in that space that you measured or outside of it? The space that wasn't measured then fills back in the middle once you stop measuring it, but it smears across the entire board so that it goes forward and backward in time. So the measurement of an event in the future does send a waveform collapse into the future. Most of what you experience, like your perception of time, is that forward domain of time. Probably because you've been rigged that way, because it's more conducive to you surviving. But it doesn't mean that your brain doesn't also have the same mechanism for measuring that objective collapse of events that are also in the future that are rippling backwards in time. So but that would also look at things like determinism. That would mean that the things that are happening in the future already happened. So that also causes another issue for the logic there.
But it's not necessarily determinism, though. It's just the most probabilistic at the collapse, or the one that happens at the collapse.
Yeah,
right?
there's
So it actually isn't
probability is
necessarily
definitely part of it.
deterministic, because it is all probabilities. Because I've seen things that didn't happen. for example. And I know people, I know I work with like psychic mediums who have like actually told me where their track record, where they're like, I was off and I couldn't see, you know, they'll just be honest that they, and once again, this is all in the woo area, but once these are personal experiences. So, and obviously you spoke about your experience with New York City with the vagus nerve, right? Isn't that where you
I
stimulated the
my
vagus
vagus
nerve?
nerve, and I was doing Wim Hof breathing
Yeah.
at the same time, and just thinking I'm just gonna raise my HRV, and I do the breath hold part like this, and then my vision goes white, and then it goes, whoosh, and I am visually seeing New York Central Park, like pure as day, like as if, you know, according to astral projection, like sitting in the park, looking out of a pair of eyes. And this lasted for a few minutes, and it seemed like time dilated, and then I was back in my office in Seattle, and I was like, what the fuck just happened? What the fuck? I thought I almost
And you
killed
knew what it was. That's the thing. Like you knew exactly what that was where you were.
Yeah.
That's
It was-
how sharp
it was
that was.
it was like a lucid dream clarity. I could hear things, I could see things. It was like there. And it was triggered by a very specific thing. And what the weird thing was, it wasn't stimulating my brain, because I started in brain stimulation with ultrasound. And then I was experimenting. This is like the first time I ever tried stimulating my vagus nerve in my neck with ultrasound. The very first time. I had all these devices.
And that's
I was
where
like,
Brent was talking about where's the brain start. I guess the question to Rob, I guess, about the brain and where it really ends here, right? Because it literally runs through the body.
Yeah, so I might have like triggered some, and again, when people talk about these gut feelings about something that's bad is going to happen, I mean, just the fact that if consciousness was something that evolution, let's say evolution is a force or something like that, was like, ooh, consciousness, the ability to observe myself and have a self-awareness of a situation so I can do things better. I want that. Okay, but if it's finding functions of physics that it can utilize for itself and have a survival advantage, if there are some weird fucking things in physics like time reversal or Planck scale dynamics, we could exist. We could literally be a version of ourselves that never figured out consciousness too. I mean, I think that could be possible. There could be what we call P zombies, and computers are a form of, I think, P zombies, where they're the automata machine. They lack the qualia system because we don't need them to need it to perform, because we are that external viewer of the system.
Computer will never experience awe. I'll just tell you right there. It just will not understand what.
But neither will a squirrel or a mushroom. Do they not have?
Yeah, that's true.
They could.
They're also not at our level of consciousness either.
What if a squirrel ate a mushroom though? Like a magic then it's like,
then it becomes us.
Yeah. Then it develops the language.
We're an hour 45 in, guys. I'd love for you guys to each take 5 minutes each and share something about yourselves or some question you guys have that we can ruminate over.
Can I throw in one more quick thought on what you were talking about, Mark? Because it's fascinating to me. And I was thinking about Brent's question of like, what mechanism, like how could that work? So the first thing I want to do is like try to disprove it. I mean, I think that's where you got to go. And I want to say it was 2007 in Bulgaria. The national lottery hit the same numbers twice in a row. And people went crazy, like, this must be fixed, and that was crazy. But statisticians were like, actually, it's a surprise that hasn't happened yet, because it's the law of very large numbers. It's not the likelihood of those two happening in a row. It's all the lotteries that have ever taken place, the likelihood of that happening at some point. And so when you talk about your experiences, they are undoubtedly incredibly unique and unlikely for you. But there is a case that it's actually surprising that hasn't happened more often with all of the premonitions that people have had in all of human history. But then
I'm shocked as well. Yeah.
But to push back on my own argument, there are a couple other pretty crazy experiments. So there was one, and Brent, you might have been the one telling me about this, and then I went and looked it up, but it was like guys had to guess what the color or the number on a card, I forget what it was, a picture card, and then they'd flip and see the card, and they would not get it right unless it was a woman who was like sexually inviting. And that actually made them get it right at a statistically significant level, saying that like part of your brain is maybe a little more attuned to what's going on in the future if there's a chance to reproduce. Then there
Or
was
the
another-
woman can send the signal better than whoever's holding the card. You know what I mean? Like we talk about intuition from the female. Look at Brent's
This is
fair
just a
side,
picture
you
on
know?
the card though of a
Yeah.
of a like sexy woman. So it's like
Mm.
you're
Oh.
primed for that. Then there was another one where so this is all like non-linear non-cause or non-linear causality. Sorry, that's the experiment they were looking at. So it was two schools, I think it was Duke and Stanford, and they had like 3,000 students go into this special room for lunch and just pick one of 6 items like burger, pizza, chicken, salad, whatever. And then 6 months later, all those same students went to the psych lab and pulled a card out of a deck, and it had one of those food items on the card. And they were like 70% more likely to have picked the food 6 months ago that was on the random card they got 6 months in the future. Again, what caused this? Who knows? What does it mean? A lot to interpret. But Sterling, I was loving what you're talking about time. Time is a very weird thing. When we talk about time, like in normal conversation, what we're really kind of talking about is the progression of entropy. And as far as we know, that will not randomly reverse.
Right. We talk about the arrow of time, right? It goes in the one direction. And is that kind of what we
that
talk
really
about?
is just the entropy part. Time, the passage of time as the universe moving forward happens at different speeds. It can seem to go by really fast to someone on the outside while it's almost stopped for you on the inside. Like what we think black holes do to time is just mind-boggling. And I have considered the possibility that maybe time is our deepest held psychological construct, and the consciousness of the universe as it's trying to move itself forward in a way that it believes is necessary, and it's created these layers to do so, has now locked us into just one direction in time. Even though physics will tell you time, like space, yes, it doesn't all exist right here at the same time, but it all exists equally everywhere and all the time. And so if you are able to strip back layers of the science side, the biology, the chemistry, whatever it may be, the perception that ties you to this version of reality, because I will argue till I'm blue in the face that this is reality. This is real. It's not necessarily the only one, but it's what we're experiencing. It is in every way real. But if we can step back from the sort of boundaries of perception that put us here, then why not? Why can't consciousness talk to itself somewhere else? Quantum entanglement, spooky action at a distance, like it seems to defy physics, but if you just go beyond physics and get to this next level, it just doesn't seem like that complicated of a problem to me.
I haven't shared the whole concept of mine as well. So go ahead, gentlemen, Brent and
I have-
Sterling. Go ahead.
There was a
Sterling,
thing I
go.
heard that's so
Yeah.
perfect to go off of what Rob was talking about in terms of like entropy and time and why there's this forward direction. And I'm just going to share what I read about it. That was like, wow, that's a really wild proposition. So the reason in this paper, I don't remember the names or details of the author. It was just on Twitter, but is that time seems to move forward because that which has happened is the process of entropy, which works like the way that we understand it is encryption. Like when you encrypt something, you make it more difficult to kind of unlock. And so the past has more of this kind of entropy encryption process eating into it. So it's not, but encryption doesn't mean it's technically impossible to de-encrypt. Just like the reason why we move forward is because it's less computationally intensive to move into a less encrypted space. But backwards time is already, there's so many, again, computational objective reductions. You can't piece it, you'd have to have like a supercomputer to be able to go back in time, essentially. But humans can, in a sense, and I'm going to pull in like, if you talk about like NLP or hypnosis or trauma therapy or Tony Robbins, all these guys will talk about people who have like a really heavy past, who can't face it, who are dealing with this kind of like future states of themselves, will go back in their mind in time and reroute the pathway that they take when they think about it. so that like some horrific event that happened when they were a child, they have to go back and physically like re-encrypt it in a different way. And that's again, that's a capability of an advanced computational ability in the face of encryption. So an entropy wouldn't necessarily be, generally entropy is going to eat us all, right? I agree with that. But there might be little holes where, you know, there's an easy pathway to, or a pathway that's worth the time to fix. But that's why we feel like it's forward, because it's easier. It's a little bit easier to move forward where there's less encryption, maybe like a blockchain kind of idea. You know, it's easier to mine new Bitcoin than it is to go back and hack the blockchain in the past. That could be kind of our universe's way of creating the illusion of time or something.
So you're saying the past is like baked into a point where we just have to know exactly every parameter, just like if you had like a Scotty beam you up, you had to know where every piece of atom is before you can get reconstituted, I guess. Is that kind of what you're saying? But in a
and that's what, like, if you've had an all-knowing, all-seeing machine system that knew every detail of your life, it knowing all those structural story narrative components, I could see an AI getting dangerous if you fed it in every pain point of your life, could technically get that ability to sort of like, it could kind of reprogram you pretty easily. But
I could do like EM with the light, light programming and all the other kinds of healing, and obviously what Brent would definitely promote, and probably all three of you guys too. So that's
you have to have the will to want to do it. That's probably, I think that's the best lesson in hypnosis. Is I learned this from Scott Adams, is, you know, people when they go in for hypnosis, and he's a trained hypnotist, so he's like an expert on this, and rest in peace, obviously. But he would say that, he would say that you have to like want the thing to happen in a sense. Like you're not going to be like, if I don't want to be hypnotized to like balk like a chicken, no, not even the best hypnosis person in the world can hypnotize me there. But it is possible if you really know the location of this. I'm kind of orienting to the back of my head, like that's time in the past and this is time in the future. There's a possibility to do it. I've seen this kind of stuff happen. I've been to these.
Yeah, but one is actually openness, though. I would argue, like some people are very easily convinced and very open to that, even if they don't necessarily want it. They're just open to doing it, if that makes sense. Like they're just not resistant. I've seen like Darren Brown and people, and I can tell exactly who they're going to get you to say by the questions he's asking. I'm like, don't say Mickey Mouse. Don't say Mickey Mouse. Say Silver Surfer. Say anything but Mickey Mouse. Say anything, and then it's like they go to Mickey Mouse and they're like, oh my gosh, you blew my mind. You're like, he put you exactly where you needed to go, because of the suggestivity of it. But anyway,
but he also he was going to be more hypnotizable too. Like he selects you to be, he's filtering.
Yes,
through
absolutely. He does it through music. He looks through the crowd. He can tell who's like zoned out or who's like, he could. It's a skill. It's like that Oz guy, the guy Dr.
Oz,
whatever the
Dr. Oz.
No, not Dr. Oz, but Oz.
The Perlman.
I've seen him. Yeah, it's Oz Perlman, but it's Oz.
Perlman.
He says it Oz.
Okay.
He's the guy that got Rogan's pin number and all this other stuff. So.
Yeah.
Also clear. I see his tricks, and it's like, I know what you're doing. I know what you're doing. So anyway. Brent, any final words, guys, before we call, man? This has been so exciting. Thank you so much. Hopefully we have a couple more of these conversations, because, man, I'm going to be listening back and just picking up some more and more things, because I'm just grateful for it. So thank you. So everyone share your stuff, go around the circle, and then we'll call it a night.
Well, I guess I'll go first then. So you can find me on X at B Gets Better. It's my personal account. I've got Anarcho SCC for Anarcho Syndicate Clothing Company, also at anarchosyndicate.com. I talk a whole bunch of shit online on X. Rob and Mark, you're pretty well aware. I think maybe even Sterling sees me once in a while. I don't know what the algorithm is.
Look out.
Yeah, fuck Tim Burchett. Yeah. But I talk a lot of politics, philosophy, science, whatever, man. Like whatever. I'm ADD as hell. I'm into all the stuff, psychedelics, consciousness, man. This is my wheelhouse. So that's me.
All right. Rob, go ahead, man.
So there are these monks that live in the Himalayas that will soak themselves in water and go out in the freezing cold and can meditate and raise their body temperature like 17 degrees. And it has always blows my mind. and I have dedicated much of my life to exploring the tethers and outer limits of human consciousness, meditation, shamanic journeys, and entheogenics of many different sorts, of as much as I could take. Like, I am down to push boundaries. I came across Brent like what 5 months ago now, and the Aiming Up podcast, you get the most amazing guests. He turned me on to your, Sterling. I think about this stuff all the time. And then Mark, I heard your full story and I was like, I don't believe in coincidence. I do believe everything's linked. I was like, I found a crew. This is cool. So I really, really appreciate this. I'm at Prosper Charlotte, PROSPERCLT 2023 on Twitter, although I'm going to change that handle soon. It's from when I ran for mayor 4 years ago. And yeah, thank you all. I'm looking forward to doing this again.
I love it. Sterling, man, close it out.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. Came from a long day at school. I'm a college kid nowadays, but I still get on Twitter. My handle is Sterling Cooley. I will fight you and debate with you if you want. I don't pull punches, so but yeah, I love to share stuff about news about xenon, microtubules, ultrasound, consciousness. So I'm kind of a good resource for that collection of subjects, and a little bit of politics here and there too. But thanks for having me.
Love it. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. Hopefully this opens the door to more. Sterling, I'll share you the podcast that I share with Rob, so you could just listen to it in the background, but you'd be like, no. And I still listen to it going, I still like look back. But anyway, gentlemen, Brent, Rob, Sterling, gentlemen, this has been another Not Conscious. Thank you so much. Stick around so we can say our goodbyes, but we're going to close this out with the nice outro, which is also the intro. But once again, at Drop the Mask Pod. Thanks, brother. Jason, hope your daughter's doing great, man. Peace out, everybody.